I spent the morning going back through exactly what's happening in Washington right now. And the more I read, the clearer it got. This isn't just politics. This is a plan, and it's already in motion. Let me walk you through it. Before we dive in, drop the country you're watching from in the comments. I want to see where everyone's tuning in today. I actually read them. So there's a lot of noise out there about the midterms. Polls, pundits, people yelling on cable news. But underneath all that noise, there's a very specific, very quiet operation happening inside the Democratic Party right now. And it has almost nothing to do with what they're saying on the campaign trail. The headline hit yesterday. House Democrats are building out a massive investigative framework. They're planning hearings, subpoenas, document requests, all of it aimed at companies and financial firms they believe are connected to President Trump. And they're doing this before they've even won the House. Now, let's be real about what that means. They're not waiting for election night to figure this out. They're not hoping for the best. They are preparing right now. Staffers are mapping out strategies. Lawyers are drafting requests. Committees are coordinating behind closed doors. This isn't a hypothetical. This is a machine getting ready to run. But here's what I find most interesting, and I think you will too. They're not planning to impeach him. Not right away. Not as their first move. That's the part that got my attention. Because if you'd asked me 6 months ago, I would have bet everything that impeachment would be the very first thing they'd try. But they're not going there. And that tells you something important about how they see the political reality. Because impeachment is a fight. It's a war with the White House. It's a battle that would consume everything and probably go nowhere in the Senate. They know that. They've been through it before, twice, and they don't want to walk into that trap again. So instead, they're going around the White House. They're going after the money, the contracts, the business relationships, the private sector partnerships that they believe created a web of influence around the president. And that is a completely different kind of fight. Let me explain what I mean by that. Imagine you're a committee staffer. You've got a list of targets. And on that list, you've got some of the biggest names in American business. Apple, Alphabet, Palantir, Blackstone, BlackRock, Elon Musk's Tesla. These aren't just random companies. These are power centers. They have lobbyists. They have lawyers. They have influence that reaches into both parties. And the Democrats are saying, we want your records. We want to know who you talk to. We want to see the contracts. We want to understand how the money moved, because they believe that's where the real story is. Not in the Oval Office, not in a transcript of a phone call, but in the boardrooms and the investment funds and the foreign sovereign wealth funds that have been doing business with the Trump orbit. Look, I'm going to be honest with you. When I first saw this, I thought it was just more of the same. Another round of political theater. Another set of hearings that would generate headlines but go nowhere. But the more I dug into it, the more I realized this is actually smart. This is the kind of strategy that comes from people who've been burned before and learned from it. Think about it. The first impeachment, the second one. What did they get? They got a lot of television coverage. They got a lot of angry tweets from the president. They got a lot of partisan warfare. But they didn't get the kind of accountability they were looking for, because the White House simply refused to cooperate. They blocked witnesses. They withheld documents. They fought every step of the way. And the Democrats learned something from that. They learned that going directly at the president is a losing game in the short term, because he controls the executive branch. He has the power to stonewall. He has the power to make it about him, which is exactly what he wants. He turns everything into a personal battle. And when it's personal, it's also political. And when it's political, it becomes a matter of tribal loyalty. But going after companies, that's different. Companies don't have the same legal protections. They don't have executive privilege. They have shareholders. They have customers. They have reputations to protect. And when a congressional committee sends them a subpoena, they have a much harder time just ignoring it. Now, I want to slow down on this next part because I think this is where the real weight of this thing hits. The Democrats have already started laying the groundwork. They've been sending letters, not subpoenas yet, just letters, to companies, contractors, organizations that they believe are connected to potential investigations. They're asking for records. They're asking for cooperation. They're not demanding yet. They're inviting. But here's the thing. When you send a letter like that, you're doing a few things at once. First, you're signaling to the company that they're on your radar. You're letting them know that if you win in November, they're going to be hearing from you. Second, you're gathering intelligence. Even if they don't give you everything you ask for, you learn something from how they respond. Do they fight? Do they cooperate? Do they stall? All of that is useful. And third, and this is the part that I think is really clever, you're making it harder for them to ignore you later. Because if you've already had correspondence, you've already established a paper trail. You've already created a record that can be used against them if they try to stonewall later. This is chess, not checkers. But here's where it gets complicated. Because the companies on this list, they're not all the same. And they're not all going to respond the same way. Let me walk you through some of them. Apple, massive company, global brand. They've had a complicated relationship with the administration, sometimes friendly, sometimes tense. They have a lot to lose from a public fight. But they also have a lot of resources to fight back. What do you think they're going to do if they get a subpoena? They're going to lawyer up. They're going to negotiate. They're going to try to limit the scope. But they're probably not going to go to war with Congress. Now contrast that with someone like Palantir. Palantir is a different beast. They're a defense contractor. They work closely with the government. They've had a lot of contracts under this administration, and they're run by people who are not shy about their political views. You think they're going to roll over? No. They're going to fight. They're going to make noise. They're going to try to turn it into a story about overreach and partisanship. And then there's Elon Musk. Elon Musk is a whole category of his own. Tesla, SpaceX, his companies have government contracts. They have regulatory issues. They have a lot of interactions with the federal government. But Elon Musk also has a personality that doesn't exactly lend itself to quiet cooperation. He's going to tweet about it. He's going to complain about it. He's going to make it a spectacle. And that might be exactly what the Democrats want. Or it might be exactly what they don't want. Because if this becomes a war of personalities, it's a different fight. And if it's a fight with Elon Musk, it's a fight that's going to play out in public. And the public doesn't always react the way you think they will. Now let's talk about the financial side of this, because that's really where the meat is. The Democrats are going after financial vehicles, investment funds, private equity, sovereign wealth funds, and they're trying to trace the flow of money. They're asking who invested in what, who loaned money to whom, who got favorable terms, who got access. This is the kind of stuff that can take years to unravel. But it's also the kind of stuff that can bring down careers. Because money leaves a trail. You can't hide it. Not really. Not if someone is willing to dig deep enough. And the Democrats are signaling that they are willing to dig very, very deep. They want to know about the foreign investors, the Gulf states, the sovereign wealth funds from countries that have been cozy with the Trump administration. They want to know about the loans, the real estate deals, the consulting contracts. They want to follow the money all the way back to its source. And this is where it gets really interesting. Because if you follow the money, you might end up in places that neither party wants to talk about. You might end up with uncomfortable questions about who was doing business with whom. You might end up with conflicts of interest that involve people on both sides of the aisle. You might open a box that nobody really wants opened. But the Democrats are willing to do it, or at least they're willing to say they're willing to do it. And that's the other thing here. A lot of this is about threat. It's about deterrence. It's about sending a message that if you did business with the Trump administration in a certain way, if you benefited from access or favorable treatment, you might find yourself in the hot seat if the balance of power shifts. Now let's talk about the response, because the Republicans are not going to sit still for this. They see this as a blatant attempt to delegitimize the president and his allies. They see it as a partisan witch hunt, and they're already preparing their own strategy. They're talking about oversight of the oversight. They're talking about investigations into the investigators. And that's the thing about Washington. It's never just one fight. It's always a series of fights that chain together. If the Democrats win the House and start these hearings, the Republicans are going to push back. They're going to subpoena the subpoenas. They're going to demand to see the documents that the Democrats are using to justify their requests. They're going to try to expose the political motivations behind the investigations. And that's where this becomes a war of attrition, a battle of subpoenas and counter-subpoenas, a fight that could drag on for years. And the companies caught in the middle, they're going to get squeezed. They're going to have to spend millions on lawyers. They're going to have to produce documents by the truckload. They're going to have to testify. They're going to have to navigate a minefield of legal and political risks. And here's what I think is the most important piece of this whole thing. The Democrats are not doing this to get to the truth. Not entirely. That's part of it, sure. But the real goal is different. The real goal is to create a climate of fear, to make it costly to do business with the Trump orbit, to make it risky, to make people think twice before they take a meeting or sign a contract or make a deal. Because if you're a CEO and you know that a Democratic House is going to come after you if you do business with certain people, you're going to be more cautious. You're going to be more careful about who you associate with. You're going to think twice before you invest in a project that has political connections. And that's the point. That's the whole point. They're trying to build a wall, not a physical wall, a wall of deterrence, a wall that makes it harder for the president to use his power to enrich himself and his allies. And they're using the private sector as the tool, because the private sector is where the power is. It's where the money is. And it's where the vulnerabilities are. Now, let me stop here for a second and ask you something. Why do you think they're not going after the White House directly? Why do you think they're avoiding impeachment? Because a lot of people on the left are going to be angry about that. They're going to say the Democrats are being weak. They're going to say they're not doing enough. They're going to say they're letting the president off the hook. But here's the thing. Impeachment is a loser in terms of actual accountability. It's a political process. It's about votes. It's about the Senate. And as long as the Republicans have the Senate, impeachment is dead on arrival. The Democrats know that. So they're not wasting their time on a fight they can't win. They're fighting a different fight, a fight they can win. And that's what makes this so dangerous for the Trump administration. Because impeachment is about politics. It's about the public debate. It's about the news cycle. But these investigations, they're about law. They're about regulations. They're about compliance. They're about the kind of stuff that doesn't go away when the news cycle shifts. They can drag on for years, and they can produce real consequences. Think about the investigations that have already happened, the Mueller probe, the various congressional inquiries. They didn't end Trump's presidency, but they did create a lot of headaches. They exposed a lot of problems. They forced a lot of people to testify and produce documents. And this new wave of investigations, it's going to be bigger. It's going to be more aggressive. And it's going to be broader. But here's what I want to leave you with, because I think this is the part that nobody's really talking about, the part that's going to matter in the long run. This whole thing, this war over investigations and subpoenas and document requests, it's not really about the companies. It's not really about the money. It's about something deeper. It's about the institutions. It's about the balance of power. It's about whether the system can hold. Because when you have a president who is willing to push the boundaries of what's legal, and you have an opposition party that's willing to use every tool at their disposal to hold him accountable, you get this: a grinding, ugly, never-ending war of attrition. And the companies get caught in the middle. And the public gets tired of it. And the trust in institutions erodes even more. And eventually, something breaks. Now, I don't know what's going to happen in November. Nobody does. The polls are tight. The districts are competitive. The turnout is going to be huge. But I do know that the Democrats are preparing for a win. And they're preparing for that win in a way that suggests they plan to use it aggressively. They're not going to sit on their hands. They're not going to try to be bipartisan. They're not going to let bygones be bygones. They're going to fight. And the president, he's not going to go quietly either. He's going to fight back. He's going to rally his base. He's going to attack the investigations as a hoax. He's going to try to make it about him and his supporters against the corrupt establishment. And the country is going to be caught in the middle. So here's where I land on all of this. I think the Democrats have a strategy. I think it's actually a pretty smart strategy politically. It's not going to be popular with everyone on the left because it doesn't give them the catharsis of impeachment. But it's practical. It's tactical. It's focused on outcomes, not headlines. But I also think it's dangerous. Because when you turn the investigative machinery of Congress against the private sector, you're crossing a line. You're turning the government into a weapon against private citizens. And once that door is open, it's really hard to close it. Because the next time the Republicans are in power, you can bet they're going to remember what the Democrats did. And they're going to want to return the favor. They're going to go after companies that were friendly to the Democrats. They're going to investigate the investigators. They're going to try to use the same tools against the same people who used them first. And then we're in an endless cycle, a spiral, a system where every election is a war and every victory is a mandate for revenge. And that's not a system that lasts. That's a system that breaks. Now, I told you at the beginning that this was already in motion. And it is. The letters have been sent. The strategies have been planned. The teams are in place. The question isn't whether the Democrats will do this if they win. They will. The question is whether the country can survive what comes after. Because once you start pulling on these threads, once you start demanding records and questioning relationships and following the money, you don't always get to decide where it leads. It might lead to places you weren't expecting. It might lead to people you thought were on your side. It might lead to revelations that change everything. Or it might lead to nothing. Just endless hearings and partisan bickering and a public that tunes out. But either way, it's happening. The machine is built. The plans are in place. And whether you like it or not, this is the future that's coming. I guess the only real question left is whether we're ready for it. And honestly, I don't think we are. I don't think anyone is. Not the politicians, not the companies, not the people who are going to have to live through this. Because this isn't just about Trump. It's not just about the Democrats. It's about what we've become. A country that can't stop fighting. A country that can't stop using power against each other. A country that's forgotten how to just govern. And that's the real tragedy in all of this. That while they're building their cases and drafting their subpoenas, the work of actually running the country, the work of solving problems, that's all going to take a back seat again for years, maybe forever. So I'll leave you with this. Watch what happens in the next few weeks. Watch the companies. Watch how they respond to the letters. Watch how they position themselves. Because they know what's coming. They're already preparing. And how they respond is going to tell you a lot about how this whole thing is going to play out. And one more thing. The Democrats think they're going after the president's allies. But they might be walking into something they can't control. Because when you start pulling on threads, you never know what you're gonna unravel. This isn't over. It's just getting started. And I'll be right here walking you through it as it unfolds. Thanks for sticking with me.